Hello and welcome back to Dystopia Now. I'm Kate Willett.
I'm Emil Torres.
Today we are here with a guest that I think probably everyone on this show knows her work. It has been so important in terms of understanding what is happening in tech today and the dystopia it's literally creating. I mean, I watched her YouTube channel and I'm like, they're doing what? Excuse me, they're doing what? She has broken some huge stories, and I'm so excited to be able to talk to her today. Welcome to the show, Taylor Lorenz.
Thank you so much for having me.
You cover a lot of topics, but I've noticed lately on your channel, you've been covering a lot of these privacy. You've been covering a lot of violations of privacy and like data capturing. And I mean, everyone thinks that stuff for the most part is creepy, but I was wondering, okay, like what are the things that you have discovered or reported on in terms of like the way that we're being surveilled or the way that our data is being taken that you think like would surprise the average person?
In less than 60 minutes, please.
Yeah.
60 minutes or 60 seconds? I could talk for 60 minutes. Yeah, I mean, it's terrifying. I'm trying to think of the most egregious examples. I mean, there's that famous story from 2012 about Target knowing a girl was pregnant before her own father.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And actually the learning, I read an interview with the Target executive talking about this. The learning after that blew up back in 2012, maybe 2013, right? Early 2010s, it was a great Kashmir Hill story. The learning that the data broker industry took from that was not that they need less hyper-targeted ads, but that they need to intentionally insert ads that they know that you're not interested in, so you don't realize how well they're targeting you. So they'll be like, we are going to target her exactly at the right time with the ad that we know that she's going to make her convert, but we're also going to like advertise like hammers to her when she doesn't need it or whatever, right? Like, and that's how well they know you. They also know when a child's parents will get divorced, often before the child, because of the data that they harvest on families and stuff. So it's just like we live in the most, as you guys know, like mass surveillance hellscape right now. And this is a bipartisan political effort to surveil us even further. But yeah, data brokers are terrible. And I'm very against all this stuff. And I'm very pro civil liberties. And so I've been covering a lot of that on my channel.
Several years ago, when I split with my partner at the time, almost immediately I started getting ads on YouTube that were eerily aware of my situation, but also a little off. So the YouTube ad would start off and say, "Are you single and 65 or over?" And I was like, well, yeah, like part of it right, but also like
one of these,
is really
yeah,
one of these, yeah. But yeah, it's really creepy the extent to which the algorithms are aware of what is going on in our lives. I mean, how exactly do these companies acquire so much information about us to be able to anticipate things like women like getting pregnant and so on? Is it that they are listening in and they're recording little 1 second snippets at a time and drawing keywords from that?
No.
Okay.
That would be simplistic compared to what they do.
Oh,
I
okay.
mean, no, I mean, for instance, I was watching another privacy person talk about this. He's a computer software engineer, but it's how hard you press when you scroll on your phone, the length of your scroll, the gyroscope, how the gait when you walk, like the small intonations in your face. Like there's just so much happening. There's so much data being harvested off these like micro interactions, almost these like micro movements that you're doing when you interact with your phone. The weird way, I mean, these AI systems as well, as they're being deployed more and more in the real world, are picking up on this. They just put in Wichita AI powered cameras on school buses that monitor micro movements on the bus drivers and surveil the kids and can identify threats. So it's harvesting all of that data and buying a huge amount of commercially available data and then synthesizing it basically with AI. And we have no data privacy. In fact, both political parties, as I'm sure we'll get into right now, are united against data privacy. And they're both selling this idea of social media addiction to enact mass surveillance, which is going to make all of this so much worse. It's terrifying.
I really want to get back to that question of social media addiction in just a second. But I also wanted to tell you about something that happened to me 2 days ago. When we were coming back from Cuba, we were all sort of anticipating, like, that we would have, be questioned and, that we needed to, I mean, everything we did there, 100% legal, but there's also a lot of specific rules about Cuba. You can only stay in certain hotels. You can only stay in you can only eat in certain restaurants. So we're like preparing, and then we show up, we walk through, they like just scan our face, and then we get in, and I'm like, that's almost weirder. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, I guess they're just pulling up all of the data that they have on you. I don't know if it's some like Palantir shit or whatever, but it was really disconcerting. And then the next day, the people who came back actually were questioned and detained by Customs and Border Patrol, which was its own hell. But I don't know, this stuff is just very, very concerning. So in terms of, what you cover and your reporting, how are like CPB, ICE, these government agencies that are enacting what is, in my opinion, fascist policy, how do they interact with all this data that is being collected on us at all times?
So the primary way that ICE and the DHS get data is through the commercial data broker market. So it's all commercial data. It's advertising data. So it's our hyper capitalist dystopian advertising ecosystem that is enabling ICE. It is the business model that big tech is based off of. Google and Meta, right? They developed this idea of like targeted ads and all that. So it's that commercial data market is how they go and get data. And sometimes they buy the data, but mostly all you have to do to get the data is enter a bidding market. So DHS and Joe at 404 Media has done amazing reporting on this too, but they'll just enter into these sort of like bidding markets and hoover up vast amounts of data on Americans. They don't even have to go through and purchase that data because they get enough data exposed just by bidding on it. Because obviously to bid on data, you have to get a certain amount of identifying data. I don't know if I'm making sense, but effectively it's all commercial data. And that is why, data privacy protections in the commercial space are so important, because the same way that McDonald's can target you, with the right ad at the right time in the right place, is also how ICE can find you and your family members. So it's really bad. It's all like, it's not like the government itself. They do, harvest data from government sources. Like we saw them go into like the Medicare, Medicaid databases, Social Security data, et cetera. But most of it is commercially available data.
Horrifying.
What are some strategies to prevent or at least impede the collection of our data? I mean, what are things we can do to protect ourselves?
I mean, I honestly change the laws. Like I've gotten to this point lately where I just listen. There's a lot of things you can do. I mean, I this is not an ad, although I did do sponsored content for them last year. I've used Delete Me for like a decade. You can use Incogni. You can use any of these many like sort of data broker, these sites that sort of strip like your info off like baseline data brokers. That's really nothing compared to like what we're seeing now. I mean, they're not even enforcing privacy protections under COPPA in order to incentivize identity verification. I think that the government has just gone so outside the bounds of anything any individual person can do. Obviously, try to use the internet anonymously while we still can. So don't log in if you don't have to. Don't, try to protect your data in ways that you can. But I just think like it's not something that you can have the best privacy sort of stuff in the world, but your best friend doesn't have those privacy protections. And so they get all your data anyway, so we have to really focus on policy fixes here.
Is it worth emphasizing the extent to which everything one does online is being tracked? Right? Because a lot of people I think don't understand the extent to which like this gets
your
back
eye movements on a web page, right? Like the way that you move your mouse, things that are, I'm trying to think of things that are like so crazy, but I feel like maybe people know this by now. But yeah, obviously everything online is failed. But still not. Here's the thing: they can harvest all this data and ultimately tie it to you, but not always definitively. So right now, for instance, there's hundreds and hundreds of anonymous anti-ICE accounts on mostly Instagram, but also other social media platforms. The government is sending subpoenas they're sending hundreds of subpoenas, I think, a week There's probably thousands of anonymous anti-ICE accounts, anonymous, pro-immigration accounts, et cetera. The government currently has to subpoena the platforms to identify who's behind those accounts, and they don't always know. If the policies that the Democrats and Republicans want go forward, these mass surveillance laws, those subpoenas will be irrelevant because we will have lost anonymity on the web.
I mean, upon what grounds are they subpoenaing people? Because it's not illegal to be anti-ICE. Are these individuals who have, threatened credible violence, or is it just literally being targeted for political beliefs?
Well, they just make things up. I mean, this is what we see in all authoritarian countries, right? Of course, that speech is technically legal. But the woman that was arrested for being in an anti-ICE group chat, anonymous who was unmasked and was in this anti-ICE group chat in Virginia, like they charged her because there was like a teenager or a couple teenagers in the chat as well that were anti-ICE student activists. They charged her with like endangering a minor or something, some ridiculous charge. So they'll make up charges. It's just so crucial if you're involved in any sort of activism, as you know, to like anonymize yourself as much as possible.
Mm-hmm.
It's so scary. It makes me sometimes fantasize about just living in a cabin in the woods and putting all this technology behind us. But then, there's good things about technology too. And I know that, from your work, you're very much, at least in my perception, not anti-technology. A thing that a lot of people have disagreed with you about that I've seen online is that you don't think that phones should be banned in schools.
Well, let's be clear why. Why.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask, though.
Because this is I need people to use your brains a little bit, everyone, and think of some nuance here. I am not pro kids sitting on TikTok during class. Who cares? Like, that's stupid. No one would be pro that. Like, that is a silly argument that no one is making. My issue, again, I care a lot about civil liberties and privacy protections, et cetera. So first of all, let's acknowledge that this entire movement to ban cell phones is primarily driven by Google and other big ed tech companies that want to ban all personal devices, personal laptops, and personal phones from school so that they can force these children to use, school-issued laptops which have surveillance software, which surveil children not just at school, but also on their home Wi-Fi networks, and they can harvest data that way, and they can do all this other stuff. So I am very against all of those ed tech initiatives. Again, it's spyware effectively that you're putting in front of children, and it's legal to harvest because, these are school issued devices. So, they've been very successful in that lobbying effort. Another thing is that these school cell phone bans are being packaged with AI surveillance technology. The number one reason why parents don't want their children to have, the phones banned in schools is because of all the school shootings. And they want Johnny to be able to call and, say his last goodbye to his mother before he's shot to death, because that's the reality of kids in America.
God.
So they're telling people, well, don't worry, we're banning the phones, but don't worry, we've also rolled out AI surveillance technology that will surveil all the students and can identify a school shooter, by the way they walk. And of course, we saw how this happened in Baltimore just a couple months ago. A kid was carrying a Doritos bag the wrong way. The AI surveillance software thought it was a gun. He was tackled to the ground by police. So that is, for those two reasons, it's a problem. Now, it's also a problem because who is enforcing these cell phone bans? The cell phone bans are written off the beeper bans in the 90s, where they banned beepers for the same reasons that they're banning cell phones. Distracting, blah, blah, blah. Those bans, not only did those bans back in the 90s result in hundreds and hundreds of kids in one Chicago school district getting arrested, criminalized, for carrying a phone, but it is cops. We have put an inordinate amount of cops in schools these days that are enforcing these bans. And it's effectively just a stop and frisk policy that is leading to Black students getting suspended at higher rates. It's become this thing where it's like, oh, I can just sort of search you because I'm going to say that you might have a cell phone. And I'm going to harass. And now we have more cops harassing students. So for all those reasons, here's the thing. I am all for I'm all for teachers. I'm all for the school itself to say, hey, we have a no cell phone policy. Everybody put it. This is a rule in our school, or this is a rule in our classroom. Great. When you talk about laws enforced by cops that are all, frankly, written by special interest ed tech groups, I'm sorry to be ranting, but it really is this thing where people just go on Twitter and they're like, Taylor wants people to be on cell phones. I'm like, no, what are you talking about? That's stupid. I don't want kids getting tackled to the ground because AI software surveilled them because they can't use a personal device at school anymore. It's just so stupid.
I think that's an excellent distinction and an important one between social norms in a space, rules that people can make in their home or their classroom, and what we want to actually make a law. I don't have a kid, but if I were a parent, I would never allow them to, watch quote unquote adult content at an age that it was not inappropriate. And yet, there are some very important reasons to not have these age verification laws to actually involve the law, and that's something that you've talked about a lot. Can you explain to our listeners who may not have heard of this, what's wrong with these age verification laws and what result could they end up having?
I think it's important to note that the term age verification is actually an industry term. Not like I'm criticizing you in any way, but I just want people to understand that even the language.
Well, you're the expert. We got
no. Like I feel like I just want people to think about the language that we use when we talk about these laws, because I actually think it's like the pro-choice versus or the pro. What did the abortion people say? The pro-life versus anti-choice, or whatever. Yeah. So age verification is this industry term coined by a lot of these data brokers that want to harvest massive amounts of data, but it's identity verification. So there is no way to verify someone's age without verifying their identity. There's not some magical, you don't go through like metamorphosis when you turn 16 or 18 on the night of your 18th birthday and you look physically different, and they can harvest all this biometric data and know how old you are. The only way they can know how old you are and know when your birthday is exactly is by knowing who you are. So all age verification is de facto identity verification. And this is a fact. There is no, again, because people don't all age at the same rate. Mm-hmm. So you have to know their birthday, you have to know their identity. So the whole thing with age verification is just de-anonymizing the web. Now, could that lead to maybe some kids seeing less of a certain type of content? Maybe, although frankly, those kids will probably figure out a way to get around it anyway. But the bigger, much more concerning issue is that we have now de-anonymized the web and made it completely impossible to use our phones or use the internet anonymously. Mm-hmm. And this is a huge problem for immigrants, whistleblowers, LGBTQ people, et cetera. It also shuts people off, right? So when you have to upload your government ID, for instance, and you're a trans person in Kansas, and now your driver's license isn't valid anymore, you can't access the internet, right? Mm-hmm. So it presents a lot of barriers. It's very dangerous. And I would say also this is mass surveillance, right? Mm-hmm. It's mass surveillance, and it's tying your real identity to everything that you see, say, and do online.
Do you have a suggestion for ways to keep kids off of websites they shouldn't be on without this kind of identity? Yeah.
Guys, the parents today have access to enterprise level surveillance software that you can install on your own kids' devices. Do I think this is healthy parenting? No, I think it's crazy. But to act like there aren't things called parental control, this is not a serious concern. And by the way, they tried to make all these arguments. The groups involved in this political effort, the Heritage Foundation, Morality and Media, these far-right fundamentalist groups, have been making the same arguments since the 90s. They wanted initially on the open web, the World Wide Web, back in the 90s, they wanted a rating system where you would have to upload your government ID and ensure that, you were above 18 years old to view the New York Times or whatever. Yeah. And a lot of the way that they've been able to push identity verification is through anti-porn laws, which is why I'm very against all that. But then now, so they set this legal precedent with the Supreme Court with porn, and now they're trying to argue, really Meta is trying to argue, because Meta is one of the biggest lobbyists for age verification online. They're trying to basically argue that the whole internet is porn. And so we need to regulate the whole internet in this way. And it's just masturbation.
How far along, to what extent have...
Very far.
Okay. Yeah. These identity, quote unquote, age verification laws been implemented around the US? How pervasive is this?
So we have 25 states, I think, where they've passed. Most of them have not been implemented yet, although places like Texas, they've implemented it on porn sites. This is why there's no Pornhub in Texas, et cetera, et cetera. 31 states, I think, have passed or considered it. There are 45 countries around the world, mostly deeply authoritarian countries, that have enacted these types of policies before. This is how they charge dissidents, et cetera, for speaking out. but we have federal legislation that will probably do this. So we have the Kids Act, the Kids Online Safety Act, COPPA 2.0, and just a slew of federal regulation that has been emboldened recently. Basically, the left and the right have completely aligned again on mass surveillance. And there is literally no political faction against mass surveillance right now at all.
Do you know how bad the situation is here in Europe? I'm in France at the moment. And I just haven't followed the news that is relevant to this issue that closely. But my sense is that it's worse over here than it is in the US right now.
It's worse and better. It's different, right? You have to think of how I talk about this with China all the time, right? You have to think about not just the policies, but also the governments implementing these policies. China has mass surveillance. China has, they do not have internet anonymity, whatever. But I would argue they have a radically different government with radically different goals than the Trump administration, right? Same thing with, a lot of these different countries. So I think with Europe, the thing is do they have a lot of bad surveillance laws? In some cases, yes. And I agree that they could be weaponized in really bad ways. But the Trump administration specifically, and American political leaders specifically, are seeking to leverage these policies, I think, in dangerous ways that I haven't seen Macron do. Although Macron is reactionary and still wants to, they haven't passed these laws in Europe yet. The UK came the closest. They passed the Online Safety Act. The Online Safety Act passed in 2023, went into effect last year. The first content censored under the Online Safety Act was pro-Palestinian speech. It was the subreddit where people were documenting war crimes. It was a lot of addiction forums. It was police violence videos, journalism, et cetera. So that's already happening in the UK, but the rest of Europe is sort of a little bit behind.
Why do you think that lawmakers, aside from lobbyists, which is always a factor, why aren't there more lawmakers concerned? I get that one aspect is this very sort of cynical framing. I'm thinking about Sesta Fosta, which is something that you've talked about on your show a lot, which, was billed as a bill to stop child trafficking and, actually just ended up having a ton of other horrible consequences for privacy, for the safety of adult sex workers, actually ended up increasing trafficking. But it's they framed it as, okay, this is against child trafficking. So if anyone opposed it, it was well, you're for child trafficking?
It wasn't just child trafficking, though, right? There were three core arguments to getting Sesta Fosta through. One was the child trafficking was the big one. The second one was just the broad harm to kids that the internet was caused, and sort of look at how harmful the real lobbying for Sesta Fosta happened in 2017, a year after basically all the major social platforms implemented algorithmic feeds for the first time. So that was when you started to see them talking about algorithmic feeds, and this is uniquely dangerous because of the algorithms. And so we need Sesta Fosta to protect the children from the sex trafficking algorithms, that's going to lead them down, an algorithmic rabbit hole and end in sex trafficking. And then the third, the other big one, which involved Amy Schumer and all these other people, was cracking down on big tech. And that's how they sold it to liberals, because liberals were very on board with Sesta Fosta, and which is so funny because who lobbied harder and got Sesta Fosta passed was Meta. Sheryl Sandberg played a crucial role in getting Sesta Fosta passed. So it was, once again, we constantly see liberals and frankly leftists align with Meta. It makes me insane. But they were arguing this is cracking down on big tech. Of course, none of that is true. The Patriot Act is not, helping America become stronger or whatever. They just mislead people, but they say those magic words and people see those magic words and they fall for it.
Well, speaking of politicians proposing AI, internet-related policies, I'm curious to know your thoughts on the recent suggestion from Bernie Sanders and AOC that they're now suggesting there should be a moratorium on AI, the construction of AI data centers. What are your thoughts on that? I've seen sort of mixed reviews from progressives online. What's your opinion?
They said that, and then the bill, literally just this morning, I started to read the actual text of the bill, which has a lot more nuance than the headlines. Overall, I think these are very blunt tools for something that requires a lot more nuance, basically. But I appreciate the effort to curtail kind of the power of tech. But what I would say to Bernie Sanders is then, like, why aren't you going against COSA? Why aren't you fighting, why aren't you like, and maybe, he hasn't actually, but he is generally, like, he tries, he's not, what I would say honestly is, like, Ron Wyden has really led the way. This Democratic senator from Oregon, one of the original co-authors of Section 230, has led the way on privacy laws, anti-surveillance pricing laws, anti-censorship laws, et cetera, from a progressive lens. Bernie sometimes gets on board, but, like, Bernie just, I think, and AOC, like, they're sort of leaning into this, like, populist sentiment more than coming up with, like, smart tech policy. And I don't love that. I like the message that they're sending on AI, and I like to see the Silicon Valley people, like, freak out about it. But, like, I don't know that that's going to get us to a better place with what's happening.
And they have other concerns too. I mean, with the data centers, they're very worried about the environmental impact.
Yes, and that stuff is real. The noise.
They're worried about the loss of jobs, and it's almost like they're definitely not locking in on what is good tech policy, because these companies are creating so many other kinds of problems for us, even beyond surveillance, and making the internet a really awful place to be a lot of the time. You mentioned Section 230, and that's something that I know you talk a lot about. What is Section 230 for people who have never heard this name or number before?
Yeah. And I am, by the way, just want to say, like, 100% like on board with the criticisms of, like, where these data centers are going, their environmental impact, the noise impact. Like, these are, nobody should be having these things all over the US in their backyards, depreciating their quality of life. Like, 100% I'm on board. I just cover things from a tech policy lens. So I'm like,
absolutely.
So Section 230 is the most foundational law. It allows user-generated content to exist on the internet. So back in the 90s, there were these two famous legal cases, effectively, where it was determined kind of like, what way would the internet go? Was the internet going to be censored, where basically every single thing that is said online, has to go through a pre-approved censor that's in line with government speech? Or are we going to have, is it going to be an open forum for free expression and open access to information? Section 230 effectively allows for the creation of user-generated content. It's the law that protects you when you forward an email. It's the law that protects you when you retweet something that could be defamatory, but you just shared it, right? It protects users effectively by allowing them to have spaces online where they can express themselves. And it puts the liability for speech on the person who produces that speech rather than the platform that carries it. Just the way that, if you go into a bookstore and you buy, like a book, that bookstore is not legally responsible for every single word of every single book that they carry in their bookstore, right? The internet is regulated in the same way. A lot of people want to take that away, and they want to regulate the internet with top-down censorship, where basically everything will be pre-screened. Meta and Google are very on board with this, because now with AI, they do have the ability to mass screen and censor content, whereas smaller forums don't.
Yeah.
Because during the past few years, we've been in an AI boom. Many of these problems predate the recent AI boom. The surveillance concerns, data privacy concerns have been brought up for years. But, since 2022 or 2023, whatever it was that ChatGPT came out, like, how has AI exacerbated our problems? I think, it's easy to be like, I'm reflexively disgusted with these, like, Sam Altman, Dario Amodei. Like, I'm fucking grossed out by, Peter Thiel. But if we're going to get, like, sort of specific about how AI has made everything harder and scarier, like, online, aside from just, job loss and environmental pollution and the other things, like, what's the difference between having this conversation now versus having it in, say, 2021?
Well, here's the thing, is that these big tech companies, and this is a little bit before they even released their main models, right? They've been using machine learning to do a lot more content censorship and sort of manage the content on their platforms. So this was after FOSTA SESTA, we saw the mass deplatforming of sex workers, of LGBTQ people, of abortion activists, et cetera. That was all done through automated AI moderation, basically, primarily, even back in 2019 and 2020. So ChatGPT, which is the first LLM consumer model, was released in 2022. But these tech companies have been using AI and leaning further and further into AI for long before that. And I think it's important for people to sort of recognize that like our problems began even when they were using these sorts of technologies in their own companies, right? I think there's so many problems with LLMs that we can get into, but what I see as a really big danger with public access to LLMs, et cetera, is just the ability to sort through and manipulate massive amounts of data. These AI companies require data. There's this whole theory, as I'm sure you guys know in tech, that like they're going to run out of training data and that's going to cause this big plateau. So they are desperate for more and more and more data. And they also can use data. I mean, this is why the Pentagon has contracts with OpenAI and Anthropic, et cetera, which they openly said on the record, or not on the record, but they openly said in these deal talks, right? We want to use this for mass surveillance because they can take all this massive amount of commercially available data and use it to identify people. It's the same way that a lot of you can upload an image to certain AI models and it'll tell you exactly where that image was taken in the world and what time of day, and sometimes even in what season or what day itself. So I think we're getting the ability to like understand a lot of this, or you know what I mean? Like they're getting the ability to leverage this data against us in new and invasive ways, thanks to AI. And not only are we not putting guardrails on any of the AI stuff, but we're also not putting guardrails on the data. And that's terrifying. Like we desperately need data privacy more than anything right now. And we're getting the exact opposite.
I'd love to talk more about large language models in a moment, but those are the systems that power contemporary chatbots like Gemini, ChatGPT, Claude, Grok, and so on. But if I may go back to Bernie Sanders real fast, because the impetus for his support or his proposing this legislation to impose a moratorium on the construction of new data centers, I think like part of it seems to arise from the interactions he's had with people in the community that I would call test grill, right? So like there was a video that he promoted of him sitting down with Eliezer Yudkowsky and a few other people like Jeffrey Ladish, Daniel Kokotalo. So Taylor, you surely saw this, right?
No, I didn't. That makes me okay. I want to jump out a window. Why is he doing that?
Yes. Auto defenestration is a term that I think a lot, because it's so. I don't know how he got connected. Perhaps like I don't know, somebody who was working for him read Yudkowsky's co-authored book "If Anyone Builds It, Everyone Dies," and so Bernie Sanders seems to have become sympathetic with this view that large language models will somehow like reach a threshold at which they can begin to recursively self-improve. And ultimately, there will be this intelligence explosion, this singularity, and that could go very well for humanity, at least from a certain utopian perspective, or could result in the complete annihilation of humanity. That's sort of the narrative that these test grill AI safety people are putting forward. So yeah, I mean, Taylor, you hadn't seen this video yet. So I was going to ask you what your thoughts are.
These are grifters. These are grifters. You know that, you know it. I know it. Yudkowsky is a grifter. I mean, these are just grifters that happily hang out with billionaires all the time. They're in the same tech billionaire circles as all these people. This is like Elon Musk, I hate all their stupid theories so much because they use these like deranged sort of sci-fi theories about like, that guy that like wants to like accelerate the heat death of the universe, because of AI. Like, it's just, this is stupid stuff. You know who I'm talking about.
Of course,
This is stupid stuff. And frankly, it is so detached from the very real problems that we have in America with labor rights, with civil rights, with like, environmental concerns. Like, what are you talking about? Super intelligent AI? Like, we need to stop climate change. We need to stop, like, there are serious pressing problems that are affecting Americans every day. And when you engage in these fantasies from these billionaire affiliated, I don't know how they get all this weird dark money. Like, I think it's so counterproductive. And it's disappointing to hear that Bernie Sanders is giving those people the time of day.
Yeah. Yeah. I was extremely frustrated to see him promoting Yudkowsky, who
But can I say something actually? Oh, wait. Oh, sorry.
No, I was just going to add real fast, just that I think a lot of people don't understand just how extreme Yudkowsky's views are, right? Like, he's literally said, I wrote a sort of profile of him for my newsletter that just cataloged a bunch of his, it's just like really bad ideas. Like, he suggested that children who die before the age of 6, that their deaths might not be a bad thing because they probably haven't become conscious yet. Somebody asked, like, well, at what period during a pregnancy do you think abortion becomes, ethically problematic? And he said, "Is there an option for 18 months old?" Right?
Oh my God!
So, like, he's been predicting the end of the world since.
Well, they're all eugenicists. Let's just be clear about that. They're all eugenicists, and that's the core. That's the another really big theme throughout that movement. But I just, one thing I wanted to say, sorry to interrupt, is like, one thing that I've noticed, and Kat Tenbarge wrote a really good piece lately because she went to this event in New York, and I'm noticing this a lot, is the far right and these really crazy people, as you mentioned, like the test girl people, the billionaires, like these really reactionary factions of the right are very effectively recruiting the left by using anti-technology language. And the fact that Bernie Sanders is meeting with somebody like that, honestly, just confirms it even more. So there's this like Steve Bannon protege who's been, I think he's the co-founder of one of these, anti-AI groups that
Joe
Kat
Allen
Tenbarge wrote about. Is that who it is? Yeah, I think that's his name.
Yeah.
But essentially, there are these really bad reactionary figures on the right using the language of populism and using the language of anti-tech to push reactionary, political movements. And I think it's so crucial that people on the left don't buy into that, because they're eugenicist weirdos that like certainly don't have the liberation of all people in mind. They just want to kind of get leftists on board with their reactionary ideas, and it's really bad. And they're not, trust me, they're not anti-tech in the way that you are anti-tech. You don't have the shared goals at all.
I completely agree with that. I've had a number of interactions with Joe Allen. He actually he got in touch with me last summer to ask me on Bannon's War Room podcast to talk about AI. So I remember this. So I declined. Because as a friend of mine who's a sort of well-known blogger, Tante, he says in an article about the sort of new movements from the right against AI, never, just as a general rule, do not side with fascists, right? I mean, Joe Allen's movement is called Humans First. I believe that's what was.
It is.
Yeah. And that is just, it's so misleading. I mean, I've retweeted some Humans First posts that he has put up on X, on Twitter, saying like, well, in truth, it's not all humans, right? It's not immigrants. Fuck them. It's not trans people. And so on. Like so I'm also very alarmed by what appears to be like a movement that is coalescing, that includes individuals from all sides of the political spectrum who are presumably united by this common denominator of an aversion to AI. And I share that aversion, but it's just really important for people to understand that those on the right who are anti-AI are ultimately not on your side at all. I mean, I think Joe Allen...
It's not just anti-AI, though. Look at what they're doing with social media. Look at what they're doing with the entire open internet.
Yeah.
This is what they're doing to all of tech. Because there is no positive vision, because the entire left has completely abdicated on tech policy for over a decade.
Yeah.
There is no positive version of really anything. There's no pro-technology arguments on the left. The left is anti-technology, anti-da-da-da. And that is such a huge shame, because not only does that mean that you end up abdicating on this issue that is, I would argue, incredibly important, because like technology affects absolutely everything in our world, but we could use technology to liberate people. Like we can use technology to build a fairer, more equitable world. Like no serious person would argue otherwise. And so I think we need to look at how these predatory kind of companies are built and look at the aspects of our tech ecosystem that we want to change. But instead, we get this sort of, I don't want to say Luddite version, because I love Brian Merchant and I read his book and now I know that the Luddites were wrongly smeared. But like, I do think that there's this like reactionary like sentiment. And that's not to say that you should be pro AI. Obviously, fuck AI.
Yeah.
But like, I'm saying like, don't just side with fascists because they're saying the right things and because they're giving you a bunch of anti-tech talking points. They aren't anti-tech because, you know, they're anti-tech because they want to usher in like a monarchy of whatever, you know, like eugenicist utopia. They don't want to liberate people. So stop listening to them. I don't know how to say it.
And may I just add that the argument that I'm putting forward and you are as well, I think applies. I mean, I would contend vigorously that it applies to people in the TESCREAL camp as well. Listeners will know what that acronym means at this point. But you know, individuals like Yudkowsky have explicitly said that if they could sacrifice all of humanity to bring into existence godlike superintelligences that are flitting about the cosmos in some like multi-galactic sprawling, you know, civilization high up on the Kardashev scale, you know, and so on, they would do that. So like Yudkowsky, he presents himself as being anti-superintelligence, anti-ASI, artificial superintelligence. He is not that at all. If he thought that it was possible to build an ASI next week that was aligned with his particular techno-utopian values or worldview, he would do that, right? And my argument is that that techno-utopian world would result in the almost certain extinction of our species. So there is
Well, that's what they're for.
There is very superficial near-term alignment between me and him, right? Because we both want to stop the race to build artificial superintelligence. But if you scratch just a little bit below the surface, you find profound disagreements. And I'm just not willing to side with someone who would sacrifice me next week if he thought that superintelligence was going to embody his values. I actually am pro-human. I actually am anti-superintelligence. Right? Against, you know, I oppose this entire race, not just because I think the goal of creating superintelligence, if that were to happen at some point in the future, would be catastrophic. But the race itself, to try to get there, is inflicting, you know, very serious harms on humanity, as I think we're all aware. That's my rant.
But they use that language though, right?
Yeah.
It's humans first. It's blah, blah, blah. You know, I just think it's like, it's the same thing with the Kids Online Safety Act, right?
Yeah.
Which is just a mass surveillance bill. Like it's just like, these are not, just because they give a nice name to it, like humans first, doesn't mean that these people are pro-human or pro, like, and who they consider human is a whole other thing. Because as I've talked about, and you have too, I know, is like, they also have like redefined the word human to mean a very narrow set of people, which is its own problem.
That might not even be human. Some people include AI beings in that definition. So it's like,
I have warned about the gerrymandering of circles of moral concern, right? To, you know, it includes like this group of people, maybe it includes like, you know, hypothetical future digital people and so on. But you have to be careful about what they mean by human, exactly as you're saying. I mean, many people in the TESCREAL movement are explicit that human should encompass not just our species, but whatever post-human beings we might have in the future. And the implication of this definition, which is widespread, I mean, more or less standard within the TESCREAL literature, is that our species could die out next year without human extinction having happened, right? As long as we are replaced by post-human beings, then humanity, quote unquote, on their definition, will persist. So this is why it's really crucial to like understand their, you know, idiosyncratic use of language, not just people in the TESCREAL movement, but like you're saying, Taylor, individuals who are on the like far right, who are talking about like being pro-human. Really, they aren't. Come on.
No, they're talking about, but they're also talking about being anti-tech, right? Or they're also, they use the language of anti-tech, anti-AI, anti-social media, you know, whatever, right? Like, I mean, that's the big problem to me. Mm-hmm. And often it's tech companies behind that stuff too.
I think I am kind of an anti-tech leftist. And there's definitely a good critique of it, but I'll explain the rationale for like how I get there. like I definitely could get down with technology being used in a positive way, like, thinking about like the work of David Graeber, like, we could use tech to give everyone more leisure time so no one has to do a mundane job, and people can just work 10 hours a week and then have the rest of the time with their family and their friends and their creativity. But in this capitalist system that we have, like, that's not changing anytime soon, and these things are being used to very evil ends.
Oh yeah.
AI is going to take away a whole bunch of people's jobs, even if it's just through companies, rationalizing firing people, and the AI isn't actually going to do the work. Like, there's like this data mining and this surveillance. It's just, it's still capitalism, but it's very difficult to imagine anything changing soon where this tech would be used in a way to benefit people. So I think,
okay, but nobody's saying. First of all, that you're talking about the current iterations of tech. That's not
yeah,
technology. That's not technology. That's a handful of corporations, right, that control our current tech ecosystem. No one is for that. I'm not saying that we need a pro-tech version for Meta and Google and all these evil, the OpenAI. No, no. The concept of technology. Like, for instance, I was talking to this guy who runs one of these like mesh networking apps that allows for anonymous communication at protests and stuff. Like, who's a technologist, right? And he's like, I want to build technology that helps the most marginalized people. Obviously, we can use technology. We don't want to go back to the 1600s. We can use technology to help the most marginalized people in society, whether that's curing disease, whether that's, all the other, yeah, it's not intertwined with capitalism, that's for sure, right? It's a less profit driven vision for our tech landscape. But the technology itself is not the problem, is my point. And we can use technology for good things, right? And so right now we have the worst tech one of the, it's going even worse probably, but we have a really bad tech landscape. That's because of capitalism, but it's also because we don't have any sort of meaningful counter to that. We don't have any alternative vision, really, except tear down that stuff, which I want to tear down capitalism. And I think we can do both of that sort of simultaneously. I think we can change the tech landscape through policy initiatives and make the internet less profitable. I give the example of, Meta and Google's anti-competitive behavior, right? First of all, Meta and Google, we both, the government lost the antitrust cases against both of them last year. That should have been the outrage from the left. Like, there should have been huge, that should have been, leftists didn't even talk about it. It's like we had the chance to break up Meta and Google in hugely meaningful ways. We could have undone the Instagram deal. That would have been like created so much more, given so much more power. Not that I think like Instagram's going to be so great, without Meta, but like, I'm just saying, like, we could have set these standards. We can create a less profit-driven environment. We can punish these companies when they engage in anti-competitive behavior, and we can facilitate interoperability standards so that you don't have to log into Facebook, for instance, and view their kind of whatever people consider addicting sort of algorithm to consume content. It allows you to data portability, where you can take your network from one platform to another. Privacy concerns, centering privacy. There are so many things that we could do to make a better tech landscape. And there are some people, lawmakers, that are proposing these things. But leftists don't get on board with any of that. Instead, they want to, and I am a leftist, I say this with love, but like, seriously, it is mostly people that just end up falling for the reactionary human first Steve Bannon slop, or Heritage Foundation. I mean, right now, this week, I'm so radicalized because like all these people on the left have been boosting morality and media and the Heritage Foundation. Talking about big tech. And it's like, you guys, what are you doing? Like, this is so stupid. And you're trying to sort of regulate content instead of the companies. And so I think that's a huge problem. And I think far too many people think of technology only as, the big tech companies, which are all evil and bad. No, obviously they're evil and bad. I would love to see all of them broken up and dismantled. But we have to have an alternative. We have to think about like, what does it look like to have a tech landscape that is not profit driven?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you on that. I think what comes in for me, and maybe a lot of other people who feel this way, is the pessimism, right? Because like these companies that are doing all this stuff, they're not democratically accountable. Like, they have as much power as many members of Congress combined, but like we don't get to vote on them, you know, they're like throwing money at our lawmakers. I mean, when you say like we could have had the opportunity to break up the Instagram deal, there actually wasn't a democratic mechanism that people could opine on that, you know, that people could express themselves. Like,
what I would say to that though, Kate, is that look at the success. There's not. I hear you, and I understand. Like this is sort of like the nihilism that you hear a lot about so many issues. Like you could say this about a lot of things, right? Like, oh, it's so stacked against us. Like, why would we do this? But look at the media narratives and look at the public narratives around these things. Ultimately, part of the reason, and it's very interesting to hear lawmakers talk about this, but part of the reason they want to censor the internet is because they don't like being held accountable. They don't
100%.
want popular sense, you know? So we can make their lives harder and we can change these narratives. And these narratives, especially public sort of media narratives, narratives online, are so powerful. They are so powerful. And so I don't think we should discount that. Like, and by the way, we killed the Kids Online Safety Act in 2022. The reason it was able to be resurrected is because a lot of these leftists have gotten on board publicly. And because we're not holding we're not holding primary candidates to these standards either. So for instance, when Ro Khanna, who's now trying to make a name for himself, gets on stage and says, I want to repeal Section 230 for violent content, AKA, make posting about Free Palestine illegal, that should be a non-starter. Leftists, instead of cheering for that, which is what they did when he was on stage with Bernie, when he made that comment, there should be boos. There should be people being like, no, I know what that means. Mm-hmm. And that means no more Free Palestine. No, the TikTok deal, I covered the TikTok ban. I went to these rallies. Okay, there were huge rallies on Capitol Hill. Leftists were not anywhere to be seen. I'm sorry. The people that were rallying were like small business owners who like have TikTok shops, you know? Yeah. And they were like, but there was this was a mass censor. The goal of that, as we know now from all the reporting, the goal was to censor pro-Palestine content. There should have been so much outrage. Everybody should have been calling their senators. Instead, you had a bunch of leftists going on the internet being like, and I know this is internet leftists, whatever, but like truly, there were groups trying to mobilize people on this issue. And I think a lot of the left is very concerned with foreign policy. They're very concerned with all these other issues, which are so important. But they also need to concern themselves with tech policy because we're literally getting techno-fascism. And tech policy has been core to the right's, central power.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I mean, I think, in terms of like people, online, that's one thing. But I think it's a completely fair claim to say that like no major like leftist organization, really had a strong opinion on this. Like I'm a member of DSA. You didn't see like DSA putting out a statement on this or anything like that. And I'm with you in your argument that, we definitely need to start knowing more about this, advocating for stuff. I think one thing that's hard, even with someone like Bernie, I'm trying to think about, how he ended up getting into, a conversation with Yudkowsky or whatever. It's because he doesn't actually know a lot about the issue. Like he doesn't understand the technology. I mean, he's like 80 years old. Like he doesn't, he doesn't have to. He probably just learned email. Like, I don't know. I don't want to be ageist or whatever. But, I think that part of the reason like reactionary forces, fascists, these corporations have been able to take advantage is because a lot of this stuff feels not understandable. Like I think, in terms of like what LLMs can do, like after reading more about it, I've learned like a lot of computer scientists don't even believe that there's going to be like some, magical super intelligent being, but these guys can just make this claim because nobody really understands what's going on. And that's why I am grateful for people like you who can, break it down to a lay audience, so to speak.
I just want people to also like think a little bit harder because I think people see these posts. The cell phones in school thing is like a good example of this, right? Where like a lot of it is counterintuitive maybe, or like the social media addiction trial that I've been covering that was like crazy, where like people think that that's a win against big tech. That's what they really believe. And that's what the headlines will tell you, right? But that's not even remotely true. Now we've set legal precedent for mass surveillance. Mm-hmm. Now we've set legal precedents for, frankly, the App Store Accountability Act, the mass surveillance law that's ID verification across the country that Meta has spent millions lobbying for. And literally, I was just dying because there was this tweet from this lawmaker, Rep. John James, Republican, who said, he tweets about the social media addiction trial verdict, and he says, "I've said it before, big tech is the Philip Morris of our time. That's why I introduced the App Store Accountability Act, to hold big tech accountable. A jury just confirmed what families have known for years. These platforms are designed to addict and harm kids." Okay, so leftists are on board with that, right? The App Store Accountability Act is Meta drafted. It is Meta. That is a Meta law that Meta informed, that Meta has spent millions and millions and millions of dollars lobbying for. So you're using the seemingly anti-Meta verdict in the social media addiction trial, which, by the way, is nothing for them. $6 million. They don't give a shit. That's nothing compared to the massive win that they just got, where now we're getting ID verification for everyone, and there is no more anonymity on the line, which is conveniently just in line with Meta's business model. But like I just think there's like nuance to these things, and that's why it's really important to have this deep understanding of like sort of anti-surveillance and pro-privacy, and think like don't let the Heritage Foundation like feed me this like moral panic slop, because it's not going to get you're going to end up voting for Meta laws,
Yeah.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I had a conversation with someone just today, about an hour before we started to record the podcast. And I mentioned that you would be our guest, Taylor. And they said, "Oh, I just saw this tweet from Taylor that I found really confusing, where she was opposing the ruling against Meta." And so your explanation here is very useful. And if there are any other details you think that people ought to know,
there's a great Mike Masnick at TechDirt did a great post on it. But here's what I would tell people, just in like layman's terms: why should you oppose this ruling? Because it sets a legal precedent for mass surveillance. Because it is the first thing that the parents that won this lawsuit came out and said is repeal Section 230, pass the Kids Online Safety Act, and pass identity verification mandatory for everything online, including like your weather and calculator app. We're talking top level, OS level identity verification for everything. You will no longer be able to see and communicate anonymously online. Yeah. So listen, am I pro Meta losing $6 million? Yeah, who gives a shit? Sure, they make that up in less than a minute, but whatever. This is a multi-trillion-dollar company. They don't care. But nice to see them lose like a meaningless amount of income. But what I do care about is now you've let the Heritage Foundation and Morality and Media, the two main groups that got these through, set tech policy that will be used to deplatform immigrants, hunt down and deport people, criminalize trans people, and censor all online speech that criticizes capitalism, which is deemed harmful for children. So, like, we just, again, it's like, guys, like, I know that the New York Times headline says that this was really, finally, big tech tobacco moment. But guess what? The New York Times headline also says, like, Israel is a wonderful state that's bringing democracy to the world. Like, just like have a little bit of like media criticism,
100%.
There is a really good Mike Masnick like explanation that like goes into good like legal detail. I'm gonna find it and send it to you guys on like why like how this is so dangerous.
And we'll put it in the show notes for listeners as well.
Oh, here he says everyone cheer. The title is "Everyone Cheering the Social Media Addiction Verdicts Against Meta Should Understand What They're Actually Cheering For," which is mass surveillance.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean the mass surveillance is. I mean, it's just so. It's so incredibly creepy. One of my good friends, his name is Albert Foxconn.
I love him.
Yeah, no, he's so great. Yeah, he's really wonderful. So he has a civil rights nonprofit, an anti-surveillance nonprofit called STOP, the Surveillance Technology Oversight Project. And in terms of, talking to him about surveillance and all of the things that are going on, like, I get not being too pessimistic, but it's just, what could a process look like where we walk this back? I mean, they have so much data. Like, how could we regain our privacy?
First of all, Albert is one of my favorite people. If you don't like me, I know that I'm a bad messenger for this stuff because I cover internet culture and I'm tweeting about clavicular and I'm so online. So people are like, oh, she's so online. Well, of course she's pushing the internet. Da, da, da. Okay, well, the other people pushing this are honestly privacy people that don't even use social media, that are not. So I know that I'm the most vocal voice, but people like Albert, who I've had on my show to talk about the dangers of things like the Kids Online Safety Act and other stuff, so wonderful. Evan Greer at Fight for the Future, all the work that the EFF is doing. Obviously, they're all amazing. There are so many things that we could do to curb the power of big tech. I mean, federal data privacy regulation, Ron Wyden, to his credit, continues to introduce these bills. Mm-hmm. Ron Wyden just introduced another anti-surveillance bill. I think it was literally earlier this week or last week. So I think we should call lawmakers, get them on board. I know electoral politics is not, nothing, but also challenge these narratives publicly and make it politically toxic for people, Democrats or more progressive candidates, to support bad tech policy. You know who has amazing tech policy, by the way? Abdul El-Sayed in Michigan.
Yeah, he's so
amazing
great.
Tech policy slate. Center civil, so there are people like him that do have good, that are leftists, that actually do have good proactive tech policy. So we should focus, not just saying oh, he's good on Palestine, oh, he's good on this. He's also good on tech. So let's support him. Let's talk about that aspect of it. I know it feels so hopeless, but you can say that about anything. It's everything is bad until it changes. And I know maybe I'm delusional, but I'm we can change things. Things can get better. It's happened,
absolutely.
I think, before. At some point.
I don't think Roe is the worst or anything, but he's, it's not a coincidence that he's the congressman from Silicon Valley pushing this, exactly. It's not a coincidence based on who his funders are.
Yeah, no, that's true. But it's but why people should be booing? I just was so mad because if I was in that audience, I would have been screaming at him or something. Yeah. And all these stupid people were yay, let's take away our rights.
Yeah.
I often think of the line, I don't know, the attribution, but it's, that many revolutions look absolutely impossible before they happen, right? And then retrospectively, they appeared inevitable, right? So it's something I keep in mind because the forces that we're up against are truly enormous. I mean, these are behemoth, juggernauts that we're fighting against, the tech, big tech companies, et cetera, et cetera. But even, I feel quite pessimistic about this situation, but I also use that pessimism to motivate myself, right? To try to effectuate change that will result in a situation where I feel less pessimistic, and then go from there, on and on. So yeah, it's really important for people to not give up. So thank you, Taylor, for...
I just want to say one other thing. Look at the deflock movement, right? These flock surveillance cameras that are being put all over America that we were all told were inevitable and blah, 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 blah. Now there's tons and tons of communities that are removing these cameras, that are fighting back against surveillance, that are saying, no, we don't want this. I really do think that if we collectively start to push on these issues, we can get more change than we think. Because a lot of it's happening on the local level, like the AI cameras in the Wichita school buses. It's ironically this one school bus driver who happens to kind of know about technology and is a hobbyist, computer guy, started to ask questions, being wait, where is this data going? What's happening? He stood up in this local meeting and got dragged out. Mm-hmm. He's just a random school bus driver, so there are these people, but you really can make a difference on a local level, because a lot of this really bad surveillance technology, even in these state laws, it's being deployed on these it's sort of doing these local testing grounds. So I think it's more feasible than you think.
I feel that's a really good optimistic note to end on. We hardly ever are ending on an optimistic note. Emil is a human extinction scholar. So, Taylor, where can people find your work?
Just my YouTube channel, Taylor Lorenz. I also do a weekly live stream on my live stream YouTube channel about civil liberties and tech policy. If you want to ask me specific questions about any of these laws, I'm always around. I have a newsletter as well on Substack called UserMag. It's just usermag.co.
Well, it was a really, really, really interesting conversation. And thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm such a fan of you guys. So
thank you.
Honored.